So, for those of you that don't know me, which is hilarious because I've been in all of your offices over the last 3 weeks, I'm Travis Rosenberg, and this is kind of an additional overview training of what we talked about in those individual meetings I had with you and your boss. The first part is we're just going to do an overview again of the law. So, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, under the Department of Labor, this is the law that requires us to pay all of our employees, a minimum wage, and also requires employees to be paid time and a half for any hours worked over 40 hours a week. There are some white-collar jobs defined in the law that are considered exempted from overtime, and to be exempted, you have to pass 3 different tests under the law. So there's these 3 tests. So there's salaried, a duties test, and I've kind of given 3 examples of that because it can vary based on the type of job duty. So, key provisions that are found within the law and why we're meeting here today. So, the salaried test is going to remain the same under law. What that means is you have to be paid a salary versus hourly. So your paycheck essentially is annualized and you get the same amount of money over the 24 pay periods of the year. That's what salaried means. The duties test is remaining the same, which means that the same duties that we've been going through to verify whether your position is eligible for overtime or exempt from overtime are staying exactly the same under the law. The difference is coming in what the salary level piece is. So what they've decided to do is change it from, if you made at least $455 a week or $23,660 a year, you could be considered exempt if you pass the other 2 tests. Which we don't have any salary positions on campus actually that are beneath that figure. So pretty much to this point in time, since all of our positions made that, we've just been doing the duties test to verify whether positions are exempt or not. But now they've increased it by just a little to $47,476. Just a little. And when they released it, they said this is going to be strictly a salary figure. So you can't include awards or benefits or retirement contributions or anything, and that has to be actual salary paid to people. And in addition, they decided to tie it to inflation. So every 3 years, me and my staff get the wonderful opportunity to go through this whole process all over again and reanalyze positions based on what the market has done. They've determined that 913 figure based on essentially cost of living of positions across the United States. They picked the least expensive region, and that's currently the South, and it's at 913 per week. So that's where that number came from. And they also said, by the way, you're going to make all of this effective December 1. So we had 158 days to decide what we were going to do and how to implement it. So what the campus needed to determine, so in our analysis, there were just over 100 existing exempt positions on campus that made between those 2 figures. And we had 4 different options. One is we could leave things as they are and just not comply. That was an option. The next one was the exempt staff to the new salary threshold. The staff would love that option, but we'll talk about what that means in a minute. We could look for ways to remain exempt but use different exemptions that maybe don't require that same salary threshold. Believe it or not, there are a few under the law that do give you some flexibility when it comes to that level, so we need to look at those. Or we could reclassify employees from exempt over to overtime eligible. And that had a couple of caveats with it as well, because different benefits varied based on whether you were exempt or non-exempt. So we had to look at that if we were going to pick that option, and why all of you are here in the training is how do we appropriately ensure we're tracking and compensating non-exempt employees the way we should be? Making sure that you're actually getting comp time, you're accruing it the way you should be accruing it, you're getting to take the time off. If not, we're paying it out to you fairly. So if we're ever audited, we can pass an audit, okay? So what the administration went through is we said, well, since we receive federal funding, we're kind of a university, after all. Compliance is probably a big deal for the federal funding piece, so option 1 went out, okay? Option 2, the administration decided there were a few positions that were really, really close to that threshold, okay? And the determination was those positions would probably generate the overtime in one case, they'd reach the level anyway, or number 2, they were probably going to get that increase with the next salary increase cycle in July. So the decision was made, if you were within that threshold, we would give you the raise essentially early, and then we'd account for it in July. It was available because, again, they didn't give us any extra money for this to happen. Okay? The next one was, again, using those existing exemptions. So there is a teacher exemption underneath the law that we can use. There's no salary threshold criteria there, but you have to have specific teaching instruction duties in your job. This is the one the faculty all fall into. And they broadened it to also include athletic coaches. If athletic coaches were spending the majority of their job instructing student athletes on how to play a sport, they could fall into that. There was also a new one created called an academic administration exemption. This one was primarily for advisement and intervention type positions, where they had a different salary threshold and specific duties they had to meet. So we could also use that one for some positions. And then the last one was we could reclassify the remaining. The decision was made they would grandfather in their vacation accruals because they were hired exempt, so we decided to leave that as it was. But we needed a uniform method for tracking all the hours, because we figured now that we've got this influx of new people coming on board, and we've been using, as you all know, 20 different ways of tracking comp time, all of them unofficial, none of them reported to HR. So when the DOO comes in and says, how much overtime liability do you have? I go, 5? Pick a number. So we were going to change that so we could pass an audit. Okay? So as part of this implementation plan, as we were making these decisions, there were 3 big common pitfalls that we wanted to avoid. One was we wanted to make sure everybody, one, was communicated with, and you had the right information to move forward. So you could actually, supervisors could plan schedules for their employees correctly. Employees knew what was expected. They knew how to request comp time if that needed to happen and those types of things. Verify our policies were up to date, and verify it was consistent. So we were giving everyone the same message, we were treating everybody the same, and it was uniform. So if you called our office, we weren't saying, okay, what area on campus do you work in? Okay, it's gonna be this, and go to this page of this policy in this handbook, sub Q4, and that's what applies to you. So our strategy was we sent out 2 campus emails, as you saw, one in July that kind of told you that, you know, this law's out, we're working on it, and then an update in September about these meetings. I met with 126 employees in individual meetings to tell you about the law and these trainings and different things. We revised the staff compensation policy. We decided systems we were going to implement to make it run effectively and efficiently. And we were going to do campus-wide trainings like this one to talk about those systems and the procedures you would need in order to manage your time. Any questions to that point? Okay, let's talk policy then. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of it all. So the first part of the policy talks about what standard university business hours are. So for most employees, this is Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., but they can be established by the area. For most places, this means you should provide coverage during these hours. This is when the community and outside people would expect your office to be open. But it doesn't mean that every single staff member in your particular area works those specific hours. For example, the cashiering office, they have to be there a little bit early to be sure they're ready for customers by 8. The dental hygiene clinic is that same way, where you've got just certain customers and clientele, so your individual schedule may be different, but those are standard university business hours. That'll be important when we talk about travel in a few minutes. Work week is Saturday morning at 12 a.m. through Friday evening at 11:59. So that'll be the determination of the 40 hours a week that a non-exempt employee falls under. And then there's this thing called de minimis work, and this is my favorite thing to talk about, okay? De minimis work is Latin, and it means minimal. So what this means in the industry is there are some times where it's just not practical to know that you're going to be clocking in and clocking out for something. So the 2 examples I give are when you're the first one in or the last one out of the office. The first one into the office typically does what? They unlock the doors, they'll turn on the lights, and then they'll go wait for their computer to boot up, assuming that it's not still running Windows 98. They will get into the system and try to log in. So there's things like that that could be considered de minimis. That's just part of the job. And the same thing is when you leave. If you're the last one out, you're turning off lights, locking doors, and that type of thing. And then there's one of my personal favorites. This happens to me often at Dixie, is the walk through the parking lot discussion. So I'm arriving at work, and I'm getting out of my car, I'm walking to my building, and someone finds me, and they have to have that 4-minute discussion with me from my vehicle to my office. Okay, do we consider that work time? I didn't really stop. I would have walked from my car to my office anyway. They just wanted to accompany me, like a private security guard. Okay, so those types of things. Okay, but it's considered seconds, minutes, those small types of things. The same thing is if, for example, if your time clock is on one side, let's say the time clock in this room was all the way over there in the corner of the network. From me walking over to the time clock to clock in for the day, me walking me back, that type of thing is considered de minimis. okay? For exempt employees, so those are employees that are ineligible for overtime, they are quote unquote responsible for fulfilling their duties and working at least 40 hours a week. That's the only part of the law that talks about exempt employees. Essentially, they're exempted from all these other wonderful things we get to talk about next, okay? They can clock in and clock out. It's not required of them, but it's not prohibited either. So some departments can choose to do it if, for example, an employee's on an attendance performance plan, or the department's trying to gather data to try to determine staffing needs. If you've got exempt employees working 60, 70 hours a week, that's probably going to lead to certain ramifications, so you may want to track that. And you can, under the law. It's just not a requirement like it is with non-exempt employees, okay? So, for non-exempt employees, how work is defined. So you work 40 hours a week, you accurately record the hours that you work, and if you need to work more than 40 hours a week, you just have to obtain your supervisor's approval to do that. You're supposed to cooperate with overtime needs as they exist, so if you have rush periods of time or periods where you need to be here to get in extra time, first of the semester, end of the semester type of thing. And then the last one is there's no off-the-clock work and no volunteer type work that relates similarly to your job. So you can't volunteer. If, let's say, your position has certain duties in it in one department, another department asks you to do those same duties in it, we have to pay you for those duties. You can't volunteer in Department 2 if the duties are similar, okay? We do expect you to take a lunch, which I hear is this meal period roughly in the middle of a work shift. For those of you that know me, I don't take lunch very often, so I don't quite know what it is, but it's a work period in the middle of your day, and it's supposed to be, it's uncompensated, but also uninterrupted, okay? Now, for some of you in the room, we've had this discussion of uninterrupted may mean you leave the building, or you leave campus, or you disappear in a hole through the floor in your office, okay? But we're not going to define any more as far as how long it needs to be, as short of the fact that it needs to be at least a half an hour, but should not exceed an hour. It can be anywhere in between the two, okay? And it cannot be used to shorten your workday on either direction. So as far as I'm concerned, your lunch could be from 9 to 9:30 or from 3:30 to 4 under the law, okay? We'd prefer it be closer to the middle of your day. Now, some of you ask, what if it's not possible for you to take a lunch? In the state of Utah, you don't have to take a lunch under federal and state law. Dixie, we require you to. That's our policy. We want you to for liability purposes. You tend to make more errors. You as I joke with Carmen Wilson, you drop raven statues on your feet when you're working too long. You decide the fire extinguisher is your friend. I mean, bad things happen. So just take the break, go have some lunch, be a happy person. Speaking of breaks can be compensated. You can be 2 during the workday. Every 4 hours, you're entitled to a 15-minute break. They just can't be combined with lunch or the end of the day. Again, yeah. So those you don't have to clock out for. Correct. Okay, so release time. There are 2 things that non-exempt employees, and this is, some of you know about these and some of you may not, but these are what are considered release time. Okay, the first one is for exercise. So you, with your supervisor's approval, can actually get permission to work out for up to 30 minutes 3 times a week. And most people take that in connection with their lunch, which is fine. It doesn't have to be that way. And it just has to be approved by your supervisor. You are not clocked in for that period of time, but your supervisor accounts for it every week when they're reconciling your time card, okay? That's what we mean by release time. Same thing works if you want to take classes here at the university. So they have to be related to your job, lead to a degree, and be approved by your supervisor. But under policy, you can take 1 class up to 4 credit hours during the workday. And if you're approved for that, they will also record this in the system for you, okay? And it doesn't have to be made up and those types of things. That's what release time means. So let me give you an example of what this looks like. So this employee is approved for 1 hour of exercise time per week. So they clock in and clock out their 39 hours. And at the end of the week, their supervisor adds 1 hour of gym time. That's how they get to their 40 hours a week. Okay? Look, pictures. People are taking pictures. We're recording the session. You can watch it later. Okay, but that's in policy. But again, with whose approval? Your supervisor has to approve it. Okay, it's not an automatic benefit. Your supervisor has to okay it. They're putting in the time. Keep that in mind on the back end. They're going to reconcile this out. Same goes for classes. Okay, so you can clock in a same scenario there. We've just used a 3 credit hour class instead of 1 hour of exercise time. Okay. So how comp time or overtime pay works. So if overtime does occur, you work more than 40 hours in a week, Compensatory time is given in lieu of overtime pay. That's the university's default position, which means we're going to give you extra time off rather than paying you extra money. Okay, that's the default position on campus. It's given to you at the rate of time and a half for anything worked. Now, I've underlined the word worked. This is important. Over 40 hours a week. So, in this example, an employee works 45 hours in a week. The 5 hours that are above the 40, you times that by 1.5, you would accrue for that week 7.5 hours of compensatory time. Okay? Straight time is given if you're in a week with a holiday or you have gym or school or bereavement or jury duty and all these other types of leave. So in this example, let's assume, since Thanksgiving's coming up, okay, there's 16 hours of holiday in the week of Thanksgiving for staff on that Thursday and Friday. So let's assume you work 27 hours those first 3 days of that week, and then you're off for the holiday. In total, how many hours for the week is that? The answer's up there, 43. Okay, so in that scenario, how many hours did you actually work that week? 27. Because you physically worked 27 hours, you get straight time for that. You still get the 3 hours of comp time, you just don't get it paid at the time and a half. Okay, that's what that means. Okay, and then your leave can be reduced or added in weeks where you take it, but let's say you work anyway. And all of us, this is my favorite conundrum. You take a vacation day and then work that day the following day. So you take that 8 hours of vacation, then you work a 16-hour day the day you get back. Okay, because that's how it works, right? So, maybe it's just me. Oh, I need a new job. So let's say this employee uses 8 hours of vacation in this week, then they attend class for 3 hours, and then they work 34 hours. So you add those three together, and you get 45 hours for that week. The supervisor at the end of that week will actually go in and reduce your vacation from 8 to 3 to get you to 40, because in theory, you weren't able to actually take a full vacation day. Okay, so rather than accruing comp time, you just get your vacation time back. Now, same scenario, let's just assume the 34 is now a 24. Okay, so in total now you have 35 hours for the week. Because you're salaried still, as a non-exempt employee, your supervisor will need to get you to at least 40. So they're going to come to you and say, okay, I'm going to add 5 hours of comp you've already accrued to get you to 40, or I need to add sick, or I need to add vacation, or contract hours, or your personal preference day, something to get you to 40. Okay, so it works in both directions. That's how your supervisor will reconcile it out at the end of the day. Okay? The maximum amount of comp time you can accrue and roll over before it's automatically paid out to you is 120 hours, okay, in the system. It's never forfeited, so unlike vacation, okay, which you have to use or lose, or contract hours, this one actually carries with you, in theory, forever. There's no timeline when you have to use it, and it never expires. That said, within the policy, we do want you to this is a department liability, okay? Meaning if you ever leave your job or move somewhere else, your department has to pay out that comp time from their department budget. And most supervisors, once that realization hits them, they tend to want to keep that balance as low as they possibly can, okay, for obvious reasons. So when does it pay it out to you? Option one is, let's say you move back to an exempt position, move to an exempt position, move to another position on campus, we do pay it out to you at that point in time. Even if you're moving from a non-exempt position to another non-exempt, because you accrued the comp time in that department. So the new department will not have to absorb that liability. You didn't accrue it there. If you ever leave employment on campus, it's paid out just like vacation at your hourly rate. And if the supervisor and you agree, you can technically have it paid out as it's accrued. You just go through a process with the payroll office to have that done whenever you want it done. Okay? Any questions there? Before we get into the fun quiz part, I get to make you do math. Or am I going too fast? Because I talk 1,000 miles a minute. It's just how I roll. Okay. So let's have fun with travel, okay? And this has been the biggest question I've gotten through this whole process. So if you're commuting to and from work, it's considered ordinary home-to-work travel time, so it is not compensated to you. The same goes if you're traveling somewhere. So let's say you're in Salt Lake at a meeting, and you're at a hotel, and you have to travel from the hotel to your meeting place. That's considered your commute for the day, because you went from the place you were sleeping to the place you were working, okay? And vice versa. If it's during normal business hours and you're traveling building to building, okay, also considered work time. So an example, you have to go from the Cox to the O.C. Tanner for a production meeting. It's considered travel time. If you're walking, like Laura Michucci did from the Hazy over to the South Administration for a meeting, same type of thing, okay? So that's considered compensated to you. But what happens when you're not here, okay? So, and this is where you want to take notes here because then there's going to be a quiz on it in a minute. Okay? So, if the travel is overnight, it's considered travel away from home. Okay? You have to stay overnight somewhere. And it's always considered work time if this travel is occurring during standard business hours, regardless of the day of the week. Which means if you're traveling on a Saturday from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., even though Saturday is not a normal work day for you, is 8 to 2 p.m. during standard business hours, then all of it is compensated to you. Okay? So that's what that one means. Number two, it's always considered work time if you are operating the vehicle as you drive from one city to another. Okay? Even if it's outside of business hours. So even if you're traveling at midnight to 6 a.m. and you're driving the vehicle, work time. Okay? But it's not considered work time if outside of normal business hours you were just a passenger on the bus, boat, barge, plane, ship, shuttle, you decide. Fill in the blank there. Unless you're actually working. Okay, so you're like prepping for a presentation, you're checking emails on the plane, you're doing something of that nature. Okay? I'm gonna leave this up for like 10 seconds and we're gonna do some math. Are you ready? Okay. So, here's scenario one, and you think this is so fun because there's fractions and other types of things. This is what me and Crystal and Kim do every week. Okay, this is why we chose these jobs, to do these types of fun math problems. Okay, so this is scenario one. Okay, so this is what somebody worked in a week. So they worked a little bit on Saturday, done on Sunday. There's their Monday and Tuesday. They worked 5 hours on Wednesday, and then they took a shuttle, okay, at 2 o'clock to Salt Lake for a meeting. Okay, this is when it arrived in Salt Lake, and while they were on said shuttle, which means they were not driving, okay, they sent emails and from that time to that time, but otherwise, that's it. Okay, they were sleeping, they were watching YouTube videos, they were reading a book, who knows what they were doing, but they were not working the rest of the time. Thursday, they have their meeting at the University of Utah, which includes a working lunch, which means you were working. Okay, and then you fly back to St. George that evening, and then you work a little bit on Friday. So get out your pens or your notepads or your calculator and tell me how many hours a week did you work? As a hint, these top four add up to 18.5. That's the only head start I'm going to give you. So we've got one person yelling 39. It's a trick question, by the way. So 39 is one answer. 34 is another. I'm not going to tell you the answer yet, by the way, so just keep guessing. Because this is just fun. This is why you're going to attend the meetings the next 2 days. This is preparation for why Empower is a good thing, because it will actually track these numbers for you. You don't have to do the math. Jason? No. The person is not on the side. They were a passenger on said plane. Good question. You got to ask. You do. You have to ask. Good question. Okay. Alrighty. So 39 is the consensus. Okay. Scenario 2. This looks really like the same. Why would I give you the same one? Okay, well, look, I threw you off by spreading those two out. I mean, that's crazy. Why would I do that? Down here, the only real difference between these two is the fact that in scenario 2, to the meeting. Okay? So took off at the same time, you take your phone calls. This is when you get to Salt Lake. You have your meeting. You leave after the meeting and drive back. So tell me how many hours in scenario 2. Hint, those still add up to 18.5. And this is meant to be good, because this is collaborative. This is what, if you travel, it's just the types of things you and your supervisor will have to discuss. 42, 47. Any other guesses? 47 and a half. 47 and a half. So what's the consensus? What's your final answer? What's our final answer? 47 and a half. You got the second one right. Oh no, it went away. First one is 40. I tricked you. Because 2 to 4, this doesn't matter. This little sentence wouldn't matter at all. Because between 2 and 5 is standard business hours. It wouldn't matter if you were working or not, still have to be paid. So I tricked you intentionally to see if you would realize that hour is still there. But you got the second one right. Okay. Now, why is this important? Why did I give you the exact same scenario? Well, yes, you define work time. When you travel as a non-exempt employee, there's 2 actual labor costs. Well, you forget about this. I mean, exempt employees forget about this, so do non-exempt. Is the fact that there's the travel piece, you're actually paying, per diem, hotel costs, conference fees, those types of things. But there's a labor cost that goes along with it too. So in these 2 same scenarios, did you attend the same meeting? Okay, but labor-wise, slightly different story, okay? So it may be cheaper or more expensive to have you fly, but these types of decisions you and your supervisor may come up with now. I'm not saying that any non-exempt employee isn't going to travel as much as they currently are. I hope you do. We want those professional development opportunities for everybody. It just may mean that they say, well, I want you to fly. And here's I want you to fly. Just take your music with you and don't work on the plane and you'll be fine. You won't even notice the difference, okay? But that's where that extra hour came from to get to 40, okay? Okay, any question? I'm gonna stop there before we move on to this last one. Any questions on how travel would work? All the smartest people ever, okay? Awesome. So supplemental pay. This is for anything above and beyond your base job that you would get extra money for. Okay, so this is another hot topic question that people have asked. So all full-time employees are allowed to have these supplemental type assignments. For non-exempt employees, because your base job is 40 hours a week, any supplemental job that you do for pay would in theory be in hours 41, 42, 43. So the requirement is you can have them, you just have to be paid your base overtime rate to do them. Because again, all your paychecks are funneling through Dixie State, okay? And there's a cap. If you're doing it during standard business hours and you're expected to make those up, we want to limit it during the day. We do want you to have work-life balance. Okay? We don't expect you to be chained to your desk. Okay? So we limit those during standard business hours that are there. Okay? Because again, this isn't release time to you. It's supplemental pay. Okay? So you're getting paid extra to do this type of assignment. And you're not clocked in if you do this, because it's going to be tracked and paid to you separately. Okay? For that time, so it's not considered clocked in and clocked out. Your department may not be liable for it. Your supplemental assignment could be in a totally different department that's paying for it. So that's why we want it tracked here. So let's give you an example. Let's say this is your salary. If you make that salary, your hourly rate is $16 an hour. So your overtime rate would be 1.5 of that, or 24. So you can accept a supplemental assignment, but they would have to pay you $24 an hour to do it, okay? Teaching, because that's the most common version of this we typically see, is viewed as 3 hours a week of work per 1 credit hour a week you teach. Okay? So if you teach a 4 credit hour class, 4 times 3 is 12. Okay? And we consider that for everything because it's all the work that has to go into it. It's not just you showing up in class, like me showing up here and giving my 36-minute presentation, and then I never see you all again. There's the prep of building the presentation, there's the grading that goes in after. The English faculty are looking at me going, because the bulk of theirs falls in that latter category. It's the required meetings you have to attend, it's the office hours, and all the other things that come along with teaching, okay? Any questions on this? That's the end. See, I told you, we get through it in 45 minutes. Okay, this is the policy library. If you want to go see the specific policy, everything I referenced here is found in the policy. So you can go reference it there. That's how you gain access to it. The presentations you'll get tomorrow and your supervisors will get on Wednesday. We'll go over the Empower piece of this. So that tracking component behind it all and how you're going to reconcile it out, that's what we're going to cover Tuesday and Wednesday. And that's it. Any questions I did not answer? Because I'm getting lots of blank looks, so either you're out. Kim? Yes. So it's not considered release time, it's supplemental pay. You're expected to work your 40 at your job. We're just saying that during normal business hours, you could do the supplemental assignment, but those other 4 hours are going to have to be made up somewhere. Okay. Yeah, so you're not expected to work 36 for the one and 4 for the other. It's 40 plus 4. Megan. Correct. So that's a good question. So let's take that scenario where you worked 45 hours a week, okay, and you got the 7.5 hours of comp time. We've already done the multiplication of the 1.5, so we take that 7.5 and times it by your base hourly rate, and that's what your payout would be. We don't then take that and times it again by your overtime rate, because we've already done the overtime calculation in the hours when you accrued it. Does that make sense? So comp is always reflected essentially in overtime-esque hours. We've already done the math behind it. Does that make sense? Okay. Jimmy. The Staff Association president, believe it or not, gets paid. That's a paid position because they have to attend certain meetings they normally wouldn't attend. They have certain assignments they have to go to. They serve on a state board that they have to attend meetings for. So that's what that means. So, no, that's the Staff Association president has to attend those. So that is a paid position, and that's why it's listed there. So, good question. Mary. In theory, it's considered de minimis, and this is what a conversation I'd say you have with your supervisor. So let's say, like in HR, we'll just use HR as an example. The time clock in human resources is going to be housed in the vestibule right outside of HR. And then I'll give you a different example. So for my staff, I'm going to say, okay, I want you to use the time clock, because in theory, you have no de minimis time. The first thing you do when you walk in the door is clock in, and then go to your desk, and if it takes 2 minutes to account for those types of things, it takes 2 minutes. Let's take the education building where you are. The time clock's by a door, the wrong door. Yes, I confirm that. It's by the wrong door, but it's by the door in the building. So your supervisor could say, okay, you use that time clock and then walk to your desk and do what you need to do. Or option 2 is you just walk in your normal door and you'll log into your computer station when you get there. But your computer may take, say, 2 minutes to boot up for you to get into Empower to actually clock in. Sure. Sure. So that's what you need to look at. The definition of de minimis time, again, is the fact that it's time that in the industry would be difficult for you to track. In some places, they may consider something like that de minimis. Or you just choose to say, look, I'm going to walk in this door, hit the time clock, and then do all these other things. And I'll do the same thing in reverse when I leave the building. Or they could also move the time clock more conveniently. But yes, you have that option. A lot of employees are going to be using time clocks, I think, more now than, say, your computer because of that very issue. Okay, but that, again, is a decision between you and your supervisor. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. Both systems talk to each other. You can use either of the two interchangeably. But the benefit of a time clock is that if you have that Windows 98 computer, it can be very frustrating sitting there just waiting for the lovely thing to boot up for you to clock in for the day. But that's a good question. Any others? Melissa? Sure. That's a good question. So what do you do when you're traveling? Okay, and you have the whole clock in and clock out thing. If you have access to secure VPN, you can do it remotely, but you have to set that up with IT, okay? And you have to get permission typically from your supervisor to be set up to do it. Option 2 is your supervisor, just like anyone in here who does time off approval or time approvals for part-time employees, you have the ability to go in and edit. Your supervisor will have that same thing. So you could send an email to your supervisor and say, I'm traveling for this trip, here's my work schedule. This is when I'm in the conference, this is when I'm traveling, and they will go and add that time in for you. So let's go back and look at that scenario so you can kind of see what clicker is over here, what that would mean. Okay, so we'll assume that you were on campus for those first 4, and you were on campus here for those 5. So this here, if you're planning out this event, this meeting with your supervisor, you could say, look, I'm going to leave here, and I will just send you an email when I get there, and I'm going to send you an email when I leave and when I get back. And they would just go in and they would add this punch from 2 to 7:30. Okay, well, 2 to 5 in this scenario, because you're a passenger on the vehicle. Okay, they would add this one because if you didn't have access to log in that day, they could add it for you. and then you're back on campus for this one. So they can always add them in for you, and you can just verify with them how they want you to report that. Is it by email? Do they want to log when you get back? That type of thing. But they can always add it in after the fact. It's a good question. Any others? No, and that's an excellent question, because I asked the same thing. I was like, well, what happens if you get here at 8:02? Really? 8:02? So it's 39.999 cents? No. So the system, and these guys will talk about this more in the Empower training, there's a slight rounding that they do. So it rounds it, I believe, to the 10th. Yeah, to the nearest 6 minutes. So it rounds it to the nearest 10 because of things like that. So you don't have to micromanage your time. We assume hardly anyone's ever going to get to 40. That's rare now. We assume you'll have a 40.2, and then the next week you'll have a 38.6, and then you'll have a 41.1, and it'll kind of ebb and flow up and down a little bit each week. We're not robots. We don't expect you to turn on at 8 o'clock and magically do your job and then power down at 5 p.m. So that's that whole de minimis discussion again. Yeah, we're not there yet, and I hope it never ends up being that way. So there you go. Okay. Well, that's it. You're all excused. Thank you all for coming.